Well, I gave some advice a little earlier about quitting alcohol, and I would say it isn't that you're trying to quit porn. It's not the right way to think about it. The right way to think about it is that you're trying to figure out how to have a better life.
So I think it's reasonable to assume that there's a novelty edge in pornography, like there is in so many quasi-addictive phenomena. And so it has to become, because novelty is a sexual kick, it has to stay novel, and that means that over time it's going to become more extreme. So that's not good. Well, so how do you resensitize yourself in some sense? Well, you stop. You stop. And then hopefully you recover. And then you deprive yourself of that outlet, let's say. And you might say, well, is that absolutely necessary? And maybe there's nothing wrong with pornography. It's like, well, I don't know, man. Like, have you ever really met a guy who is proud of that? Like, you know what I mean? That makes him feel like, I'm the guy, man. I'm watching pornography and getting off. It's like, what a man. I don't believe anyone feels that. And to me, maybe I'm wrong. And to me, that's an indication that, yeah, we know. No, it's pretty cheap. It's cheap. It's easy. And, I say that knowing that I believe the research evidence shows that if you introduce pornography into a community, that rates of sexual crime committed by men upon women actually decline. So there is perhaps some utility in the outlet. But, that's a unidimensional analysis. It doesn't take into account all the other effects of pornography. I think that those are real. It makes sense that they're real, because it's super satiation. And it's a non-trivial technological problem. It's now possible for young men to look at more beautiful nude women in one day than any man has ever seen, prior to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, than any man in history had ever seen. That's not nothing. That's something. And to think that doesn't do anything to you, it's like, no, that likely does something to you. So don't substitute the false for the real. And don't underestimate the utility of deprivation. What do we need to drive us forward to have the adventure of our life? Well, some deprivation, that's for sure. That heightens desire and drive. And maybe you need that. You're afraid to approach a woman. Well, you remove part of your drive with pornography. And so now you don't have that sexual urge to overcome that anxiety. And so you stay timid for your entire life. Maybe not, but maybe. Well, how can you adapt to reality when you falsify it? And you think, well, I'm just lying to other people. No, you're not. You can't just lie to other people, because what you say becomes you, especially if you practice it. Because we build ourselves out of words. And that can be lies in action too. It's like, don't say things you know to be false. That's a good start, man. And it aligns yourself with the truth. And how can that be a bad idea? Imagine that what is true reflects reality, which is sort of the definition of true. How can failing to align yourself with reality work? How is that possibly going to work? Well, you say, well, I can, if I lie, I get away with something. It's like, no, you don't. I tell you, I swear this is true. In all of my clinical practice, I have never, ever seen anyone ever get away with anything even once. You think the chickens won't come home to roost. It's like, all that means is you're too stupid to see what your lies caused, or too blind or too self-deceptive. You just don't see it. And so you don't get away with anything. Nothing. It's terrifying to actually understand that. It's terrifying. What if you can't get away with anything, ever? Well, that's the judgmental God, fundamentally. That's a very old idea, and it's an old idea for a reason. And of course you can't get away with anything, because imagine that you took a flexible plastic comb, and you bent it backwards, and you say, well, I got away with that. It's like, well, what's going to happen when you let go? It's going to snap back and hit you in the face, and that's That's life, man. You warp the structure of reality? You think you are someone who can warp the structure of reality with your words and get away with it? Really? No, man, that should terrify you right to the core of your soul. You're not God. If find someone like that, great. But I've never seen anyone like that. And psychopaths, they have no conscience. They lie all the time. Well, how do they get away with it? They don't. They have to move. Because people figure out who they are and then they have to move on. And so you could say, well, that's getting away with it. It's like, well, no long-term relationships, no love, no trust, no brotherly affection, no friends, and generally no financial success, not in the real sense. How is that getting away with it? And then you might say, well, I've got away with it so far. It's like, maybe you have. And maybe you're just too dim to see the consequences because you've blinded yourself, and God only knows who you could have been if you wouldn't have lied your way to where you are now. No, I've never seen it. And sometimes I'd work with someone to untangle what had happened to them over multiple years as things fell apart. And we'd find all sorts of lies. Not always ones they told, but sometimes lies their parents told them, for example, that deep, dark, terrible things. Messing things up in an unbelievably catastrophic and tragic way. Now, it was absolutely terrifying. But I can't see how it just doesn't make sense. It's like, how could you possibly defend the idea that you could warp the structure of reality and get away with it? I mean, who, like I said, who do you think you are? Reality is, you don't mess with it. Like, it kills you. And it'll torture you quite a lot before doing that if you're particularly unlucky. So beware. They say the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. That's that judgmental God. It's like, you violate your conscience, man. You will pay. That's hell.
Well, I would say do the future authoring program and keep your porn addiction in mind and think. So in the first part of the future authoring program, it asks you a bunch of questions about what your life could be like in 3 to 5 years if you took care of yourself like you were someone that you cared for. And then it asks you questions about your friends and your family and your career and your time outside of work and your health and, the important dimensions of life. And it asks you to spend 20 minutes writing about how good your life could be in 3 to 5 years if you got your act together and did what was good for you. And then it asked you to write about the hell you could be in if you didn't. And so I would say you really need to do that because porn isn't the issue. The issue is that you're not living your life the way you want to. And so you need a vision of life that's more compelling than the porn. And you need a counter vision too that frightens you, because otherwise porn is obviously extraordinarily gratifying in the short term, but you seem to be suffering from the medium to long-term consequences of its use. And so you need a story that you can tell yourself that's really deeply thought through about why this is not appropriate for you, how it's hurting you and how it's minimizing you and perhaps making you embarrassed and ashamed and more socially isolated and all of that. So I would say, think about it as cleaning up your psyche and your behavior rather than merely stopping porn. You also might want to write down, and you could do this in the negative vision part of the future authoring program. You got to write down everything bad that you think porn is doing to you, because obviously you have some suspicions that this is not good for you, right? That it's actually harming you in some important way. And so you need to be fully cognizant of what those ways are and then take them seriously and decide if that's the pathway through life on which you wish to travel. And so, and then I would also say good luck to you. It's a very good idea to identify one of your weaknesses and work on it. You can strengthen yourself substantially by doing it.